The crystal flute of champagne shattered against the marble floor, silencing the grand ballroom. 500 faces turned toward Elise Harlow, who stood frozen in the center of the room, champagne splashed across the hem of her emerald gown. "You want to know what my brilliant wife does all day while I'm working?" Marcus's voice carried through the stunned silence. His perfect jawline tightened as he stared down at her, whiskey fumes rolling off his breath. "She pretends to write a novel no one will ever read." Elise couldn't breathe. The weight of hundreds of stares pressed against her skin, executives, philanthropists, old money and new, all gathered for the most prestigious charity gala of the year. Her fingers trembled as she bent to pick up a shard of broken glass. "Don't bother," Marcus said, gesturing vaguely at a nearby server. "That's what the help is for." A photographer's flash went off somewhere to her right. Through the blur of humiliation, Elise saw him standing at the top of the marble staircase. Alistair Blackwood, the legendary billionaire philanthropist and host of the evening. His steel-gray eyes met hers across the room with an expression she couldn't decipher. What Elise didn't know, what no one in that ballroom knew, was that 34 years earlier, Alistair Blackwood had made a promise to her dying mother. A promise he was about to keep. 3 months earlier, Elise sat at the kitchen island of their Beacon Hill brownstone, staring at her laptop screen. The cursor blinked mockingly at the end of the sentence she'd been trying to finish for the past hour. The sound of Marcus's key in the front door made her quickly save the document and close her laptop. She smoothed her hair and checked her reflection in the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator. "There she is," Marcus said, dropping his briefcase by the door and crossing the kitchen to plant a kiss on her forehead. "My beautiful wife, exactly where I left her this morning." Something in his tone made her stomach tighten. "How was your day?" she asked, moving to pour him his customary glass of Macallan 18. "The Cambridge project is officially green-lit." He loosened his tie and accepted the glass, taking a long sip. "We're breaking ground next month." "That's wonderful," she said, genuinely happy for him. The development had been his obsession for the past year. "We should celebrate. Already taken care of." He set down his glass. "I ran into Leo and some of the guys from work. We had a few drinks at the Oak Room." "Oh," Elise said, trying to hide her disappointment. "That sounds nice." Marcus was already scrolling through his phone. "By the way, the Blackwood Foundation Gala is coming up. I RSVP'd for both of us." Elise nearly dropped the glass she was holding. "The Blackwood Gala? But that's invitation only. How did you—" "Leo knows someone on the board." Marcus smiled, satisfied with himself. "It's the networking opportunity of a lifetime, Elise. Everyone who matters in Boston will be there. Including Alistair Blackwood himself." She tried to keep her voice steady. "That's the rumor, though he rarely makes public appearances these days." Marcus eyed her curiously. "Why? Don't tell me you're one of those people who obsess over billionaires." Elise turned away, busying herself with the dishes. "No, of course not. It's just impressive. The gala's for a good cause." "It's for every cause," Marcus said. "Cancer research, children's hospitals, arts education, Blackwood's foundation funds it all. But for me—" He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's about showing off my beautiful, accomplished wife and making connections that'll take Harlow development to the next level." His lips pressed against her neck, and Elise closed her eyes, letting her body relax into him. There were moments like this, tender, almost reminiscent of their early days together, that made the growing distance between them seem like a temporary aberration. "I need to look perfect," she murmured, already mentally cataloging her closet. Nothing she owned would be appropriate for such an event. "You always do," Marcus assured her, his hand sliding lower. "But if you want something new, get it. Consider it an investment in our future." Later that night, after Marcus had fallen asleep, Elise slipped out of bed and padded to her office, the converted sunroom that overlooked their small garden. She unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk and removed a worn leather photo album. Inside, tucked between pages of childhood memories, was a photograph she'd studied countless times. Her mother, young and radiant, standing beside a tall man with dark hair and serious eyes. They were laughing about something, her mother's hand resting lightly on the man's arm. Written on the back in her mother's elegant script, Claire and Al, Martha's Vineyard, Summer '89. Elise had found the album after her grandmother's death 5 years ago. When she'd asked her father about the man in the photo, he'd dismissed it, saying her mother had many friends before they'd met. But Elise had done her research. The timing, the initials, the matching description. The man in the photo was almost certainly Alistair Blackwood before he'd made his fortune. What she couldn't figure out was how her mother, a middle school art teacher from Western Massachusetts, had known him well enough to be laughing so comfortably at his side. And why, after her mother died of cancer when Elise was just 4 years old, had Blackwood anonymously funded her education all the way through her MFA in creative writing? "I still can't believe we're going to the Blackwood Gala," Zoe said, digging through the rack of designer gowns. As Elise's oldest friend and a stylist for Boston Magazine, she'd insisted on helping select the perfect dress. "I can't believe Marcus scored an invitation," Elise replied, examining an overpriced blue sequined gown before putting it back. "He's been insufferable about it. Every conversation somehow circles back to which executives will be there." Zoe shot her a sideways glance. "And you're sure you don't want to tell him about your suspicions? About Blackwood possibly being your mysterious benefactor?" Elise shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. I've never told him about the anonymous scholarship, and I'm not about to start now." She lowered her voice. "You know how he feels about my writing. If he found out someone had paid for my impractical degree, he'd try to leverage it somehow," Zoe finished, nodding. "Got it. So what's the plan? You're just going to casually bump into one of the most reclusive billionaires in America and say, 'Hey, did you know my mom and possibly fund my entire education?'" "I don't have a plan," Elise admitted. "I just want to see him in person. Maybe then I'll know what to do." Zoe pulled out a stunning emerald green gown with a plunging neckline and delicate beadwork. This is the one." Elise touched the fabric reverently. "It's beautiful, but no buts. You need to outshine every socialite and trophy wife there." Zoe pushed the dress into her arms. "Try it on. Now." When Elise emerged from the dressing room, Zoe's eyes widened. "Holy shit, Elise. You look like you belong on a red carpet." Elise turned to examine herself in the mirror. The dress hugged her curves perfectly before flaring slightly at the bottom. The deep green made her hazel eyes look almost golden and complemented her auburn hair. "Marcus will love it," she said, smoothing the fabric. Zoe made a dismissive noise. "Forget Marcus. Every person at that gala will be staring at you, including Alistair Blackwood." Later, as they sat at a small cafe near Newbury Street, Zoe stirred her latte thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "And you have to promise not to get mad." Elise raised an eyebrow. "That's never a good start to a question, but go ahead." "Are you happy? With Marcus, I mean." Elise's hand stilled around her coffee cup. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because you flinch every time he calls or texts. Because you talk about your writing like it's some dirty secret. Because the Elise I knew in college would never have put her novel in a drawer to plan dinner parties for her husband's clients." "That's not fair," Elise said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Marriage is about compromise. Compromise is we take turns picking the movie on date night. What you're doing is..." Zoe hesitated. "It just seems like you're disappearing, Elise." Elise stared into her coffee. "It wasn't always like this. When we first met, he was supportive. He used to read my stories, give me feedback. What changed? I don't know." His company took off. We bought the house. Suddenly, my writing was a hobby and his career was everything. She looked up at Zoe. But he loves me. In his way. Zoe reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I know he does. I just miss the fire you used to have. It's still there, Elise said softly. Just banked for now. What she didn't tell Zoe was how she'd caught Marcus reading her emails last month. How he'd suggested she turn down a part-time teaching position at a local community college because it would distract from supporting his networking needs. How sometimes, late at night, she wondered if she'd traded her voice for security. And she definitely didn't mention the growing suspicion that Marcus was having an affair with his new project manager, Rebecca. The night of the gala arrived with perfect early autumn weather, crisp and clear, with just enough chill to justify the fur stoles and cashmere wraps of Boston's elite. The Blackwood Foundation had rented the entire Museum of Fine Arts for the occasion, transforming the grand spaces into a glittering showcase of wealth and philanthropy. In the back of the town car Marcus had insisted on hiring, Elise adjusted her emerald earrings with trembling fingers. Stop fidgeting, Marcus said, his eyes never leaving his phone. You look beautiful. He did look up then, his gaze traveling appreciatively over her dress. Green was a good choice. Most of the women will be in black or red. Elise smiled, grateful for the rare compliment. Marcus himself looked undeniably handsome in his custom tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled. At 36, he still had the lean build of the college athlete he'd once been. Nervous? He asked, pocketing his phone as the car pulled up to the museum's entrance, where a red carpet had been laid out and photographers clustered behind velvet ropes. A little, she admitted. It's been a while since I've been to something this formal. Marcus took her hand, his expression softening. Just stay close to me. I'll introduce you to everyone who matters. For the first hour, the evening unfolded exactly as Marcus had planned. They moved through the crowded galleries, Marcus networking effortlessly, introducing Elise as my wife, the former writer, or my better half, though she'd never admit it. Elise smiled and sipped champagne and tried to ignore the way he steered conversations away from her whenever someone showed too much interest in her background. The museum's vast central courtyard had been transformed into a ballroom, with a small orchestra playing softly at one end and bars set up at strategic intervals. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Any sign of the man himself? Elise asked, scanning the crowd for Alistair Blackwood. Not yet, Marcus replied, but I did spot the governor and half the Patriots' starting lineup. Oh, and there's Leo with Rebecca. Let's say hello. Elise's stomach clenched at the mention of Rebecca's name, but she plastered on a smile and followed Marcus toward his colleague, Leo Chen. Marcus' business partner greeted them warmly. Rebecca Winters, the project manager Elise suspected was more than just a colleague to Marcus, wore a sleek red dress that left little to the imagination. Elise, you look absolutely stunning, Leo said, kissing her cheek. That color is perfect on you. Thank you, Elise replied, genuinely fond of Leo, who had always treated her with respect. It's good to see you both. Rebecca gave her a tight smile. That dress is so unique. Vintage? Before Elise could respond, Marcus laughed. Hardly. I just signed off on the credit card statement. A small, awkward silence followed, broken by Leo suggesting they get another round of drinks. As the men headed toward the bar, Elise found herself alone with Rebecca. Beautiful event, Elise said, trying for polite conversation. Rebecca nodded, her eyes following Marcus across the room. He's been looking forward to this for weeks. So much opportunity in a room like this. Something in her tone made Elise look at her more closely. Yes, Marcus has always been good at recognizing opportunity. Rebecca met her gaze directly. He certainly has. She took a sip of her champagne. You know, he talks about you all the time. Does he? He says you're very supportive. Elise maintained her smile with effort. Marriage is about supporting each other. Rebecca's expression shifted to something almost like pity. Of course it is. She glanced over Elise's shoulder. Oh, look. They're announcing something. A distinguished woman in her 60s had taken to the small stage at the far end of the ballroom. The crowd quieted as she tapped the microphone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Margaret Sinclair, chairwoman of the Blackwood Foundation. On behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for your generous support. As Margaret continued with her speech, detailing the foundation's accomplishments over the past year, Elise found her attention wandering to the grand staircase that led to the museum's upper galleries. A movement caught her eye, a tall figure standing in the shadows observing the proceedings. Her heart skipped. Even at this distance, she recognized him from the photographs she'd researched. Alistair Blackwood had aged since the picture with her mother, his dark hair now silver at the temples, but he carried himself with the same dignified presence. And now, Margaret was saying, I'm honored to introduce a man who rarely appears at these events, preferring to let his work speak for itself. Please welcome our host for the evening, Mr. Alistair Blackwood. A ripple of surprise and excitement moved through the crowd as Blackwood descended the stairs. He was tall and lean, impeccably dressed in a classic tuxedo. At 67, he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to commanding rooms much larger than this one. As he took the stage, his deep voice resonated through the space. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you all for being here tonight. I'll keep this brief. I've always believed actions speak louder than words. Elise barely heard the rest of his speech. She was transfixed by his face, searching for any resemblance to herself, any hint that might confirm or deny her suspicions. His eyes, were they similar to hers? The shape of his jaw? She couldn't be sure. He's more impressive in person than I expected, Marcus murmured, suddenly at her side again with a fresh drink in hand. He'd already had several, Elise noted with concern. When the speeches concluded, the orchestra resumed playing, and the crowd returned to mingling. Elise kept Blackwood in her peripheral vision, watching as he moved through the room, stopping to speak with various guests. I need to meet him, Marcus said, finishing his whiskey in one swallow. Leo knows someone who can make an introduction. Marcus, maybe you should slow down a bit with the drinks, Elise suggested gently. He gave her a sharp look. I'm networking, Elise. This is how it's done. I know, but what? You think I don't know how to handle myself? His voice had risen slightly, drawing glances from nearby guests. That's not what I said, she replied, keeping her voice low. I just think. You just think, he mimicked. That's always been your problem, hasn't it? So much thinking, so little doing. Elise felt a flush creeping up her neck. Marcus, please. Not here, but he was already signaling a passing server for another drink. Leo says Blackwood's heading this way in about 15 minutes. Try to say something intelligent when I introduce you. Elise excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment alone to collect herself. In the elegant powder room, she stared at her reflection in the gilt-edged mirror. Her cheeks were flushed, but otherwise she looked composed. The perfect corporate wife in her perfect gown with her perfect smile. You can do this, she whispered to herself. Just get through tonight. When she returned to the ballroom, she couldn't immediately locate Marcus. She scanned the crowd, finally spotting him near one of the bars, deep in conversation with Leo, Rebecca, and a silver-haired man whose back was to Elise. Her heart jumped. Alistair Blackwood. She moved quickly through the crowd, arriving just as Marcus was mid-sentence. Completely transformed the neighborhood. The locals complained about gentrification, of course, but that's the price of progress. An interesting perspective, Blackwood replied, his voice measured. Though I've found that the most successful developments incorporate the existing community rather than displacing it. Marcus laughed a little too loudly. With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, that sounds great in theory. But in practice, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Marcus? Elise said, touching his arm lightly. There you are. He turned, his smile too wide, eyes slightly unfocused. Elise! Perfect timing. Mr. Blackwood, this is my wife, Elise Harlow. Alistair Blackwood turned to her, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. His steel-gray eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flash of something, recognition, shock, crossing his features before his expression returned to polite interest. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, extending his hand. "A pleasure to meet you." His grip was firm, his palm warm against hers. Up close, Elise could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "Your foundation does remarkable work." "You're very kind to say so." His eyes hadn't left her face, studying her with an intensity that seemed at odds with the casual conversation. "Elise has a master's in creative writing," Leo offered. "From Columbia. Is that so?" Blackwood's expression softened. "Are you a writer, Mrs. Harlow?" Before she could answer, Marcus let out a short laugh. "She likes to think she is." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Rebecca looked away, while Leo shifted awkwardly. "I mean," Marcus continued, oblivious to the tension, "she's talented, don't get me wrong. But she's been working on a novel for what, 3 years now?" "4? Marcus," Leo warned quietly. "What?" Marcus shrugged. "I'm just being honest. It's not like she's published anything." Elise felt the blood drain from her face. "If you'll excuse me," she managed to say. "I need some air." She turned to leave, but Marcus caught her arm. "Don't be so sensitive, Elise. We're just talking." She pulled her arm free. "Please let go of me, Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said, ignoring her. "You're a businessman. Wouldn't you agree that at some point you have to cut your losses on a failing project?" Blackwood's expression had turned to stone. "Actually, Mr. Harlow, some of my most successful ventures were those that others had written off as failures. Persistence is a quality I greatly admire." "Well, that's very inspirational," Marcus said, his words slightly slurred. "But in the real world—" "In the real world," Blackwood interrupted, his voice quiet but sharp, "one should recognize when they've had enough to drink at a professional event." Marcus's face flushed. "I'm sorry? Marcus," Leo interjected. "Maybe we should get some coffee." "I'm fine," Marcus snapped, grabbing a champagne flute from a passing server. "A toast to our gracious host, who clearly knows everything about everything." "You want to know what my brilliant wife does all day while I'm working?" Marcus said suddenly, his voice carrying through the stunned silence that had fallen around them. "She pretends to write a novel no one will ever read." The champagne flute slipped from Elise's fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a crash that seemed to silence the entire ballroom. 500 faces turned toward her. Elise couldn't breathe. The weight of hundreds of stares pressed against her skin. Through the blur of humiliation, she saw Alistair Blackwood's expression shift from shock to something darker, more dangerous. A photographer's flash went off somewhere to her right. "Mr. Harlow," Blackwood said, his voice so quiet that only those standing closest could hear. "I believe it would be best if you left now." Marcus swayed slightly on his feet, the reality of what he'd just done beginning to penetrate his alcohol-fogged brain. "Mr. Blackwood, I apologize. I've had a bit too much." "Yes, you have," Blackwood cut him off. "And now you're leaving." He signaled to someone across the room, and within seconds, 2 security personnel materialized at Marcus's side. "This is ridiculous," Marcus protested, but he allowed himself to be escorted toward the exit. "Elise, come on. We're going." Elise remained frozen in place, mortification burning through her veins. "Mrs. Harlow will stay," Blackwood said firmly. "I suspect she could use a moment to collect herself without your assistance." As Marcus was led away, the orchestra began playing again, and the crowd gradually resumed their conversations, though many still cast curious glances in Elise's direction. "I'm so sorry," Leo said to her, genuine distress in his eyes. "I should have cut him off earlier." Rebecca had discreetly vanished. "It's not your fault," Elise said numbly. "Mrs. Harlow," Blackwood said, his tone gentler now. "Would you care to step outside for a moment? The Japanese garden is particularly peaceful at this time of evening." Elise nodded gratefully, and Blackwood offered his arm. As they made their way through the ballroom, she was acutely aware of the whispers that followed them. The museum's Japanese garden was illuminated by soft lanterns, the autumn air crisp and clean after the stuffy ballroom. A small stone bridge arched over a koi pond, and the sound of water flowing over rocks filled the silence. "I must apologize for the behavior you were subjected to," Blackwood said as they walked slowly along the garden path. "No one should be humiliated that way, especially by someone who claims to love them." "Thank you for your kindness," Elise replied, her composure returning now that they were away from the crowd. "But I'm the one who should apologize for disrupting your event." "You disrupted nothing. Your husband, on the other hand—" He let the sentence trail off, his disapproval clear. They stopped at the edge of the koi pond, watching the orange and white fish glide silently beneath the surface. "May I ask you something, Mr. Blackwood?" "Of course." Elise took a deep breath. "Did you know my mother? Claire Linwood?" If she'd expected shock or denial, she was disappointed. Blackwood's expression remained calm, though his eyes softened at the mention of her mother's name. "I wondered if you'd figured it out," he said quietly. "Yes, Elise. I knew your mother very well." "Were you—" She hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question that had haunted her for years. "Your father?" Blackwood smiled gently. "No, though I would have been honored to have a daughter like you." Relief and disappointment mingled strangely in her chest. "Then why did you pay for my education? All of it, from private school through Columbia?" "Your mother was my dearest friend," he said, turning to face the pond again. "We met in college. I was a scholarship student with big dreams. She was an art major with an even bigger heart. When she got sick, I had just made my first $1 million. I wanted to pay for experimental treatments, specialists, anything that might help. But she refused." "That sounds like her," Elise said softly, "at least from what I remember. What she did ask was that I look out for you, to make sure you had every opportunity to pursue your passions, just as she had." He glanced at Elise. "She made me your godfather, though we agreed to keep it private. Your father never knew. He was a proud man, and after Claire died, he wanted to sever all connections to her past." Elise felt tears threatening. "So all these years you've been watching over me?" "From a distance," he confirmed. "I receive reports about your progress periodically. I know about your writing talent. I know you were offered a book deal 2 years ago and turned it down." She stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" "I make it my business to know things," he said simply. "What I don't know is why you said no." Elise looked away. "It wasn't the right time." "According to whom? You or your husband?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "It was a mutual decision, was it?" Blackwood's expression was kind but penetrating. "From what I witnessed tonight, I wonder if mutual is the word I would use to describe your marriage." "It's complicated," she said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "Life usually is." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card, offering it to her. "This has my private number. I've waited a long time to meet you properly, Elise. I'd like to hear about your novel, when you're ready to talk about it." She took the card, running her finger over the embossed lettering. "Why now? After all these years, why reveal yourself tonight?" "I didn't plan to," he admitted. "But seeing you walk into that ballroom, you look so much like her. And then witnessing how your husband spoke to you?" His jaw tightened. "Some things cannot be ignored." A discreet cough interrupted them. One of Blackwood's assistants stood at the garden entrance. "Sir, the auction is about to begin." "Thank you, James. I'll be right there." He turned back to Elise. "Will you be all right?" She nodded. "I should probably go home." "Nonsense," he said firmly. "You'll stay for the remainder of the evening as my guest of honor. Your husband has been seen safely to a taxi, and tomorrow, we can discuss your future, whatever you wish that to be." "My future?" Elise repeated, the concept suddenly seeming both terrifying and exhilarating. "Your mother always said you were meant for extraordinary things, Elise." He offered his arm again. "I believe she was right." 3 weeks after the gala, Elise sat in Alistair Blackwood's office on the top floor of the Blackwood Tower in downtown Boston. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the Charles River winding its way toward the harbor. "I still can't believe I'm doing this," she said, staring at the publishing contract on the desk between them. "Having second thoughts?" Blackwood asked, leaning back in his leather chair. "No," she said, surprised to find it was true. "For the first time in years, I'm absolutely certain." The night of the gala had changed everything. After Blackwood had escorted her back to the ballroom and introduced her as his goddaughter, to the astonishment of Boston society, Elise had returned, home to find Marcus passed out on their living room couch. The confrontation the next morning had been ugly. Marcus had alternated between profuse apologies and bitter accusations, claiming she'd deliberately humiliated him by cozying up to Blackwood after he'd been thrown out, when she'd finally told him the truth, that Blackwood was her godfather and had been her anonymous benefactor all these years. Marcus had been incredulous, then calculating. "This changes everything," he'd said, his tone shifting from angry to excited. "Do you know what kind of doors he could open for us? For my business?" "For your business," Elise had repeated flatly. "That's your first thought? Don't be naive, Elise. This is an opportunity we can't waste." "There is no we in this situation, Marcus. Alistair is my godfather, not a business connection for you to exploit." The argument had escalated from there, ending with Marcus storming out and Elise sitting alone in their kitchen, a strange sense of clarity washing over her. By the time Marcus returned that evening, she had packed 2 suitcases and called Zoe. "You're not leaving," he'd said, blocking the doorway. "We can work this out." "We can't," she'd replied, surprised at the steadiness of her voice. "Because this isn't about last night, or even about Alistair. It's about years of you slowly crushing my dreams while I stood by and let you." "That's not fair." "It's exactly fair. I've spent the last 4 years tiptoeing around your ego, pretending my writing doesn't matter, watching you flirt with your project manager. Nothing happened with Rebecca. It doesn't matter if it did or didn't. What matters is that I don't recognize myself anymore." She'd picked up her suitcases. "Please move out of my way." He'd stepped aside, his expression a mixture of shock and anger. "Where will you go?" "Zoe's for now. We can discuss the house and everything else when things are less raw." "Elise?" he'd called as she reached the door. "Don't throw away 8 years over one bad night." She'd turned to look at him one last time. "It wasn't one night, Marcus. It was 1,000 little moments where you made me feel small. I just finally opened my eyes to see it." Now, 3 weeks later, she was signing a contract with Blackwood Publishing, a small but prestigious imprint that Alistair had acquired years ago. "I want to be clear," Blackwood said as she put pen to paper, "that this is based solely on the merit of your manuscript. I wouldn't publish it otherwise." "I believe you," Elise said, signing her name with a flourish. "But I'm still grateful for the push." The push had come in the form of a dinner at Blackwood's Beacon Hill home a week after she'd left Marcus. Over a meal prepared by his personal chef, he'd asked to read her novel. "I've been curious about it ever since your husband mentioned it at the gala," he'd said. "If you're comfortable sharing it, of course." She'd sent him the manuscript the next day, certain he was just being kind. 3 days later, he'd called with an offer. "Your mother would be very proud," Blackwood said now, taking the signed contract and placing it in a folder. "Not just of your writing, but of your courage." Elise smiled, thinking of the photograph she now kept framed on her nightstand in the guest apartment of Blackwood's home, where she was staying until she found a place of her own. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said. "That photo of you and my mother at Martha's Vineyard, were you more than friends?" Blackwood's expression turned wistful. "We were, briefly. Before she met your father. But life took us in different directions. She found happiness with your father, and I buried myself in building my company." "Do you regret it? Not fighting for her?" He considered the question carefully. "I regret not telling her how deeply I cared. But I don't regret respecting her choice." He smiled at Elise. "And I certainly don't regret watching over her daughter all these years." Elise's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and sighed. "Marcus again?" She nodded. "He wants to meet. To talk about reconciliation." "And what do you want?" "Honestly, I want to focus on my book launch. I want to remember what it feels like to be proud of my work. She paused, considering. I want to write the next chapter of my life without someone else holding the pen. Blackwood nodded approvingly. Then that's exactly what you should do. As they stood to leave his office, Elise impulsively hugged him. After a moment of surprise, he returned the embrace. Thank you, she said. Not just for the publishing deal, but for keeping your promise to my mother. It's been my privilege, he replied softly. Outside Blackwood Tower, the autumn sun was setting over Boston, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Elise took a deep breath of the crisp air and began walking toward the public garden, where the leaves were turning brilliant colors. Her phone buzzed again, but this time she didn't look at it. Whatever Marcus wanted to say could wait. She had her own story to write now, and for the first time in years, she knew exactly how it should begin.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.